Last week, I called for something which I knew was highly controversial. I said that Fani Willis, the Fulton County, Georgia district attorney looking into former President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, should drop her case against Trump after the feds indicted him for basically the same conduct. Not because she doesn't have a case, and Willis certainly has the legal ability and right to try to move forward, but I argued it wasn't the right thing to do. And I stand by what I said. Now that Fani Willis and her office has officially indicted Trump and 18 other co-defendants in a 41-count indictment, 13 of which are against Trump himself, wide-ranging racketeering case alleging Trump and his allies conspired to reject the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. Quote, this is important, Trump and the other defendants charged in the indictment refused to accept that Trump lost, and they knowingly and willfully joined a conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of the election in favor of Trump. That conspiracy contained a common plan and purpose to commit 2 or more acts of racketeering activity in Fulton County, Georgia, elsewhere in the state of Georgia, and in other states. Now, my comments were never related to others, just the former president. And let me be clear. This indictment reminds us of the absurd lengths that he and his team went to try to overturn the unambiguous results of the election. Now, Trump, of course, denies the charges. He set his own press conference for next week where he says he's going to present a large, complex, detailed, but irrefutable report on the presidential election fraud which took place in Georgia, which will lead to a complete exoneration of him. We shall see. The Republican governor of Georgia highly doubts it. I wouldn't expect to see much there. But here are the 2 main reasons that remain as to why Willis shouldn't be doing this, in my view. Number 1, the federal case makes the Georgia case against Trump duplicative and unnecessary. And number 2, Willis's case is riddled with conflicts and political considerations that will be easy for the Trump team to exploit. Her bringing this case is bad for everyone, and I mean everyone. Let's start with the more important issue, that the federal indictment makes Willis's case unnecessary. That federal indictment went into depth on the Georgia allegations. Here's an example. Quote, on January 2nd, 4 days before Congress's certification proceeding, the defendant and others called Georgia's Secretary of State. During that call, the defendant lied to the Georgia Secretary of State to induce him to alter Georgia's popular vote count and call into question the validity of the Biden electoral votes, which had been transmitted to Congress weeks before. Now, compare that to the Georgia indictment, which highlights the very same quote, on or about the second day of Georgia, Donald John Trump and Mark Randall Meadows committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by a public officer. All right. Do we need another case brought on basically the same set of facts? Not all the facts are the same. Jack Smith goes state by state in the federal indictment, very meticulously addressing conduct in those other states. So are now those state prosecutors going to bring cases against Trump too? To be clear, that is different from charging the actual fake electors, as Michigan and now Georgia have done. I'm talking about actually charging Donald Trump. Yet the biggest argument I hear again and again is that if Donald Trump is reelected, he couldn't make state charges go away. Only federal. This would be pardon-proof. It's true, but A, that's not a reason for a prosecutor to act. And B, there is no way this state trial is going to happen anytime soon. So if Trump wins, a state prosecutor will not try the sitting president of the United States in a criminal case. Think about it. The U.S. Supreme Court barely let Bill Clinton get sued in a civil case while in office. They will not let it happen here. So we're talking about 2029. And that could be why Fani Willis is pledged to do the impossible, which is try to get this case to trial within 6 months, when she currently has a separate gang-related RICO case, which is still in the 8th month of just jury selection. But there's a larger issue. even the DOJ itself has a policy seeking to limit multiple prosecutions. I've talked about this. It says, quote, the purpose of this policy is to protect persons charged with criminal conduct from the burdens associated with multiple prosecutions and punishments for substantially the same acts or transactions, to promote efficient utilization of department resources, and to promote coordination and cooperation between federal and state prosecutors. I think the reverse should be true as well. But it's not just that. It's also that Fani Willis's conduct before last night was relevant. She's given more than 36 media interviews on the investigation. The judge overseeing the grand jury said she's, quote, on national media almost nightly talking about the investigation. And in many of those interviews, she repeatedly kept hinting at the outcome. Not going to tell you, but basically don't worry, he's getting indicted. In the end, it was certainly not a question of if the indictment would come, but when, because we knew from listening to her. And her explanations for why it's taken 2.5 years to get here have made little sense.
The right to have your vote protected is a serious one. And so, I've told people many times I'm not going to be rushed. We are doing what is needed for justice.
Now, that can't be true. With the special counsel, the delay is more easily understood, right? Attorney General Garland likely wasn't going to bring charges against Trump for trying to overturn the election, even after the January 6th Commission criminal referrals. It just didn't seem the Attorney General was going to act on it, much to the frustration, by the way, of many liberals. And then the documents case lands on his lap, with the former president seemingly trying to prevent the DOJ from getting back highly sensitive government documents stored at Mar-a-Lago. So at that point, Garland apparently feels he's got no choice. He has to deal with it, eventually appoints a special counsel, who then basically takes it where he wants to. And that explains that delay. I mean, Jack Smith has only been investigating since November of last year. But what could possibly have taken Fani Willis this long? It took her a year to even impanel a special purpose grand jury. Remember, that special purpose grand jury was just advisory. So they hear evidence for, 8 months? And then they clearly recommended indictments in February. Remember, we knew that because the foreperson, just like Fani Willis, was kind of sort of hinting at it.
Did you recommend charges against Donald Trump?
We definitely heard a lot about former President Trump, and we definitely discussed him a lot in the room. And I will say that when this list comes out, there are no major plot twists.
It all felt like a game. Meanwhile, Willis has also regularly appeared to express her own personal opinions that what Trump did was illegal. After all, the key legal question is, did he have corrupt intent, right? And Willis has long made it clear that in Trump's call to the Georgia Secretary of State, where he asked to find those 11,000 plus votes, that he had that corrupt intent. This is before the indictment ever came down.
You look at facts to see, did they really have intent? Did they understand what they were doing? Detailed facts become important, like asking for a specific number and then going back to investigate and understand that that number is just one more than the number that is needed. It lets you know that someone had a clear mind. They understood what they were doing.
So if you know that was why it had happened, why did it take 2.5 years? Yes, the RICO case she's now charging is sweeping and has moving parts that take time. But it just feels like she's been milking this. And that's not all. She's also overtly politicized it. Last July, less than 2 weeks after Willis subpoenaed South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, she used her campaign Twitter account to tweet out a cartoon which showed her fishing Graham out of a swamp with what appears to be a depiction of Trump saying, quote, "I know you'll do the right thing for the swamp, Lindsey," all the while her campaign using the account to solicit donations. Can you imagine if that was a Republican prosecutor seemingly exploiting the subpoena of a progressive liberal Democrat to solicit campaign donations? There would be no end to the mainstream media's hysteria, accusations of political bias, etc. This is a criminal case. This is serious stuff. And this wasn't the only time Willis and her surrogates referenced the Trump investigation to solicit followers, tweets, and donations for her campaign. And that doesn't even address the actual documented conflict of interest she had. Willis subpoenaed alleged fake elector Burt Jones, a Republican state senator who at the time of the subpoena was running for lieutenant governor. Willis then hosted a fundraiser for Jones's political opponent. Jones went on to win the election, but the Fulton County Superior Court judge, Robert McBurney, who's presiding, could not believe what he saw in a hearing, calling it a "what were you thinking" moment. Court could have just kicked her off the entire case right there. Look, Fani Willis is too far into this politically to let this go. I understand that. I also get the arguments about accountability, potential pardon, state versus federal cases. But I think the right thing to do would have been to let the feds handle a case that is about conduct by the President of the United States while he was president. And to those who desperately want to see Donald Trump locked up and believe that any prosecution of him is a noble one, I think you may come to regret this case. Already yesterday, there was the release of what appeared to be a draft indictment of Trump hours before the indictment was handed up. The DA's office calling the document fictitious, but the charges listed on it turned out to be identical to the final ones against the former president. They didn't include the other defendants, but it was a huge blunder, and one Willis wasn't even willing to address.
No, I can't tell you anything about what you refer to. I am not an expert on clerks' duties or even administrative duties. I wouldn't know how to work that system, and so I'm not going to speculate. Next question.
Now they're saying it was just a test sample, except it immediately gave the Trump team a legitimate argument. And I'm betting this case will end up giving Donald Trump and his supporters many more legitimate arguments to make about the unfairness of the prosecutor and/or the process.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.